Hey, this is Doug Hamp. I want to talk to you about the law of Moses and the law of love. There's a lot of misunderstanding, in my opinion, about what people think about the law of Moses. Somehow they have this idea that God gave these laws to Moses and they were exclusive to the nation of Israel, that they have really no bearing on the rest of us, and that these are things that were essentially nailed to the cross. Again, they don't affect us and they're not for us today. Check out this. This is something I got on my Facebook page. I've, of course, blurred out the name so that we don't see it, but this is a woman, and she said, I am a Gentile, so Paul is my apostle. The law of the Old Testament and the four Gospels don't apply to me. I don't worship on Saturdays. I don't slaughter, middle spelling there, lambs when I sin, and I am free to obey the Lord because of love, not law. Wow. Now there's a lot in there, but this woman is really just, she's very typical of what a lot of people think about the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. But notice that she says the law of the Old Testament and the four Gospels don't apply to me. Now, why would she, a Christian? I know this. I know this woman. She's a Christian. She loves Jesus. Okay, but notice what she says. She says, "I'm a Gentile, so Paul is my apostle." So she's saying that the Gospels don't apply to her. Why? Well, because all those things that Jesus taught, who was he talking to? He was talking to the Jews. He wasn't talking to Gentiles, right? And it all happened before the cross. You see, this is what a lot of people believe. Now, I taught for many years in a seminary level, and speaking with some of my students after they graduated, I kind of got into this discussion about should we follow the words of Jesus? He says, well, the words of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, were not for us. They're not for the church. They were for the Jews. And, I was kind of flabbergasted, so to speak. But then again, I wasn't because I thought, yeah, this is the basic idea. Now, I hope I didn't teach that when I was teaching this man. But it's this idea. It's so rampant that people think that, well, the teachings of Jesus are not for me. But this just isn't really the case. So to suggest that the four Gospels don't apply to us, I would argue, is incorrect. Now, here's one of the basic ideas that people have is that God gave the law, the Torah, only to the Jews for a limited time. Well, that really is false. Now, the truth is that these commandments that God gave are all about love and they are forever for all people. And that includes Sabbath. God created the Sabbath on the seventh day, right? He created a special day and it says that he rested. The word there in Hebrew is Shabbat, right? So he did that not for himself. He did not need the day. He created it as a blessing for us. That day off you wish you had every week? He created it for you. It's called the seventh day or Shabbat. And so that's the day that he has set aside, he has blessed, and he's given it to us as a gift. And so we should enjoy it. Here's the next one. The Old Covenant was about laws and rules, and it wasn't about love. Whereas the New Testament, or New Covenant, is based on love, not rules. Again, that's false. It's just not true. You see, God's loving betrothal marriage was to Israel, and he lovingly shared his values of right and wrong. His instructions were always based on love. Jesus taught the Father's instructions, and hence the law of Christ is the Father's laws, and the Father's laws are the Father's laws. And so the Father's laws, what did the Father give at Mount Sinai? We could argue, is it the Father? Was it the Son that gave the commandments at Mount Sinai? It really doesn't matter because they're one in purpose, one in mind, one in thought. They're completely unified. And everything that they say and do, everything that Jesus said was what the Father would have said. All right, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So we don't need to argue that point. That's kind of an interesting discussion. But either way, it was the Father, it was the Son, it was both of them giving their instructions at Mount Sinai. So when we say that it was We talk about, oh, I follow the law of Christ. Well, then you're following what God gave at Mount Sinai. That is what we're supposed to be doing. Here's another big misnomer that God nailed the burdensome old covenant law to the cross. Oh my goodness, that's like fingernails on a chalkboard. You know, remember back when, if you're old enough, those chalkboards, right? And you take your fingernails and it was just that nasty sound, and like your teeth just start to vibrate in these weird kind of ways. That's the same kind of feeling I get when I hear people say that God nailed His law to the cross. It's just not true. What God did is He had to cancel his first marriage contract because Israel, whom he married, went after other gods and she committed adultery. So only the penalty of breaking them was removed, but not the commandments themselves. Because notice, God says, I will make a new covenant and I will put my what? My law. That is Torah T in the Hebrew. I will put my Torah, my instructions. He gave his Torah at Mount Sinai, and he'll put his Torah in the hearts of people under the new covenant. So if you claim to be a new covenant Christian, which I hope you are, I'm a new covenant believer. I'm not an old covenant believer. I'm a new covenant believer. But what does God say He's going to put in our hearts? His Torah. Put it in their minds and write it on their hearts. And here's another one. Jesus' teachings, the Gospels, only applied to the Jews up until the cross, but not after. Hence, Paul is my apostle idea that this woman said on Facebook. Again, that's absolutely false. Jesus' teachings, that is the Gospels, apply to all before and after the cross. And so they're the same laws that the Father gave at Mount Sinai. Let me just put it this way. God's instructions are all about love. Notice what Jesus said in Matthew 22. He says, you shall love the Lord your God. Well, that's taken specifically from the Old Testament, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. You see, looking at the graphic there on the left side of your screen, love, that's the character and the will of God. It's all about love. And then the question is, well, what does love look like? Because, I can easily justify and rationalize my own actions and say, well, I took your lunch money, but that's okay because if you love me, you'd give me your lunch money, right? That's the basic idea is that we tend to rationalize our actions. But God's commandments say, no, 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 no. What you're doing is not loving. And so we need these specific instructions because otherwise we have a tendency to not do what is loving and to do what is hurtful. And so the commandments give us a yardstick, right? It's a measuring stick of what is actually good, what is actually right, versus what we just want to pretend is right. So those actions of love